It was embarrassing. Last week, Sunday, I taught this really awesome first part of Isaiah because we're working through the prophets. And so I taught the first part of Isaiah. I did a fantastic job, taught a really great lesson, and realized midway through that I hadn't even turned on my camera. So that was great. It was great for me.
It was good practice. You do it again this week?
Yeah. I got it. No, then I hadn't even, it wasn't even that I'd forgotten to hit record. I hadn't even set it up. My phone was in my pocket. It was completely not even in the picture. This has nothing to do with Acts, but I'm going to use it just as I was going through Acts the first time. I taught this around this time just as you can consider this just kind of bonus, just kind of extra, my reflections on part of what it means for our spiritual journey. And I taught it at that time about this point in Acts, so I'm going to teach it this time too. And it's just short. It's an added bonus. You got the added bonus because you showed up today.
It's right. We're here today.
Yeah. So there's a poem thing that you may have seen on many a chart and on many a picture hanging in people's houses. It is called Footprints in the Sand. You've probably heard it, right? And it details a certain part of our spiritual journey. Okay? Let's go over it. One night, the poem goes, I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord. Many scenes from my life flashed across the sky. In each scene, I noticed footprints in the sand. Sometimes there were 2 sets of footprints. Other times, there were 1 set of footprints. This bothered me because I noticed that during the low periods of my life, when I was suffering from anguish, sorrow, or defeat, I could see only 1 set of footprints. So I said to the Lord, you promised me, Lord, that if I followed you, you would walk with me always. But I have noticed that during the most trying periods of my life, there have only been 1 set of footprints in the sand. Why, when I needed you most, you have not been there for me? The Lord replied, the times when you have seen only 1 set of footprints is when I carried you. And that is a part of our spiritual journey, is that as we're going through and at the times when we feel like we were at our weakest, the Lord steps in and carries us. It's a very important part. But it's not the only part. There's another part to this. Let me share with you another part of your spiritual journey that is a poem entitled Butt Prints in the Sand.
And you wrote this one?
No, I can only aspire to such genius as this poem was. I can only dream that one day I will be able to generate something like this.
Okay.
One night I had a wondrous dream. 1 set of footprints there was seen, the footprints of my precious Lord. But mine were not along the shore. But then some stranger prints appeared, and I asked the Lord, what have we here? These prints are large and round and neat, but Lord, they are too big for feet. My child, he said in somber tones, for miles I carried you alone. I challenged you to walk in faith, but you refused and made me wait. You disobeyed. You would not grow. The walk of faith you would not know. So I got tired. I got fed up, and there I dropped you on your butt. Because in life there comes a time when one must fight and one must climb, when one must rise and take a stand, or leave their butt prints in the sand. And that's the other part of our spiritual journey. God will carry us when we need him the most. But then we're expected to eventually get down and start walking in faith again. And as we've seen in Acts, there are some that Paul travels with that do that. They struggle, but then the Lord kind of brings them back and they walk alongside Paul again. But then there are others that Paul says, they just left. They're gone now. And then sometimes the Lord needs to drop you. And that's a part of our spiritual journey too. So there you have it. Yes, very, very motivational. I'll forward it on to Brandon. He can print you a whole sermon around that. That'd be great.
Probably see it on the front of the bulletin next week.
Right? Just like a sand with like a button print in it. Yeah. Acts 23, which I entitled The Council, again, because we keep getting drugged before councils. And in this case, just to set up the context, does anyone know where we are, like location-wise? Where are we? Where are we? Anyone know? Like, where on the map? If you had to guess, where's Paul right now? Where might we be?
Is he in Corinth? Where is he now?
Ooh, take some time. You could find the passage if you want.
He was going near Ephesus, but he didn't go to Ephesus. He called out the leaders last week.
Okay. And then, where was his final destination?
It was in Jerusalem.
There we go.
Back there again.
And that's where we are. And remember that on the way, he was saying, the Holy Spirit is sending a message saying, when you go to Jerusalem, you're going to be persecuted really heavily. And everyone is like freaked out about that. And they're saying, Paul, don't go, don't go. And he's like, I need to go. The Lord's telling me I need to go. This is part of how I'm going to get to Rome. It seems weird and counterintuitive that I would have to go east to go west, but that's what I have to do in this case. And the Lord wants me to do this. Well, we find out that like he gets to the brothers in Jerusalem, and they say, Paul, great, glad you're here. Awkward conversation. So there's people here that don't like you. Could you go and just go to the temple and just act really Jewish and do some really Jewish things? That way they'll know like you're a good Jewish guy and we won't get in any trouble. And Paul tries to go along with it, but then what happens is people see him near the temple and they freak out. They think he's got a Gentile with him, so they think that he has taken the Gentile into the temple itself, which is a big time no-no. There's big walls that are supposed to keep the Gentiles out. He didn't take the Gentile in there, but people started saying that. So they formed a big unruly mob and tried to tear him apart. So the Roman garrison gets summoned, because if there's one thing Rome doesn't like, it's riots. You can believe whatever you want, but as soon as there's a disturbance, you've crossed the line, and that's when the garrison gets summoned. So the Roman commander takes him and is about to beat him. And Paul says, just wouldn't be doing my job here if I didn't just ask, is it okay for you to just go on and beat a Roman citizen even though they haven't really been charged with anything or found guilty? And the commander's like, oh, I guess I didn't ask that question. Yeah, I can't do that. Okay, well, I actually need to find out what Paul's actually done. And I don't really understand, because I'm a Roman commander, and all these Jews are yelling these very Jewish things that I don't understand, and I barely even speak their language. I speak enough to get by, but I don't even speak that much. I really don't understand why they're accusing this guy Paul of anything. I thought that he was like an insurrectionist, but he's not. Okay, I don't get it. So the next day, because the commanding officer wanted to know the true reason Paul was being accused by the Jews, he released him and ordered the chief priests and the whole council to assemble. He then brought Paul down and had him stand before them. Okay, we're going to get to the bottom of this, just in a nice orderly way, just summon the whole council, and then maybe I can figure out what's going on. Paul looked directly at the council and said, brothers, I have lived my life with a clear conscience before God to this day. At that, the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. Well, that's not very nice. Ananias, this dude's a piece of work. He is quite the high priest. He is like the the anti-high priest. We look back in our history at like popes that some popes were really good and awesome, and some popes were really bad and secular. That's kind of Ananias. He became the high priest in AD 47, and Josephus, a Jewish historian, talks about him being very despicable, very all kinds of despicable. He would steal tithes for his own use that were supposed to go to the ordinary priests. So he would take extra money. So the tithes are the priest's food money. So he would take food money from the other priests so that he could have more. He gave very large bribes, both to Romans and Jews. He was very much a political animal, so he had no problem bribing whoever he needed to get what he wanted. He was summoned to Rome at one point to account for a bloody battle between Jews and Samaritans. Part of the reason why is because it was thought that he might have had something to do with inciting that bloody battle between Jews and Samaritans. Very wealthy, partially because he's stealing tithes from other priests. And he had no problem. This is the high priest, by the way. The number one exemplar, the one who stands before God and man pre-Jesus. He had no problem using violence and assassination to accomplish his goals. Okay? Very pro-Roman, because the system that Rome had, that was benefiting him quite a bit. And so he liked having them around. So because he became that, the Jews ended up assassinating him when they had their uprising against Rome, which is 9 years after this particular incident. Okay? So he eventually got assassinated because of his pro-Roman sympathies. But see, in this case, so why did he just have Paul struck? He's already decided Paul's guilty. And so the idea that Paul would say that he has a clear conscience, that strikes him as very offensive, because he already knows that Paul's guilty. It's just a matter now of getting Paul to confess that. So Paul said to him, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Similar to what Jesus would call the Pharisees, right? Whitewashed tombs and whatnot. Do you sit there judging me according to the law, and in violation of the law, you order me to be struck? So here we have a prophecy of Ananias' own judgment here. See, the thing is, in Jewish law, people were innocent until they were proven guilty. You weren't supposed to just strike people until there had actually been a judgment of some kind. So in this case, Ananias is having Paul punished before he's even been charged with something, which that is a violation of the law. Those standing near him said, "Do you dare insult God's high priest?" Paul replied, "I did not realize, brothers, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you must not speak evil about a ruler of your people." So, note the role he takes. He would be justified then of being very angry towards the high priest, but he backs off because he's going to follow this command even though someone has unjustly hit him. I did not realize,
I wonder if he really didn't realize it, or if it was just a
Well,
response.
I'm speaking to that here.
Kind of a snap.
He's been away from Jerusalem for 20 years. It's a long time. High priests get changed out more regularly. He may not have been able to actually recognize the current high priest. Could have been someone completely different. Ananias could have just been any old priest. He may not have known. And Ananias, in that context, may not have been wearing his special high priest robes. We don't know how they were dressed, but this is the Roman garrison has summoned this. This is not the council meeting there of their own accord, so he may not have been dressed like that Paul would have expected the high priest to dress. We don't know. But these are possibilities. Either way, this is a good lesson for us too. You must not speak evil about a ruler of your people. Something for us to remember, especially in this time and season.
Right. So true.
remembering Romans 13, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except by God's appointment, and the authorities that exist have been instituted by God. So the person who resists such authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will incur judgment. See, at this point, you have to know what's going on in Paul's head. Paul knows he's not going to get a fair trial by the Sanhedrin. They won't even observe the law and how he's supposed to be treated. They're not even supposed to hit him. If they're not going to observe that, how's he going to get a fair trial? Well, he's not. And he knows that. So, at this point, defending himself is not going to work because they've already decided that he's guilty. So his next tactic is just to go full offense and just go on the offensive about it. Then when Paul noticed that part of them were Sadducees and others Pharisees, he shouted out in the council, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. I am on trial concerning the hope of the resurrection of the dead." Just throws that little cherry bomb into the mix. So there's a couple things going on here. There are two issues. One of them is theological and one of them is kind of tribal. Okay? Let me see if I've got... See, the thing is, it actually kind of spells it out here a little bit. When he said this, an argument began between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say there is no resurrection or angel or spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. So he's done two things. One, he said, I'm a Pharisee, the son of Pharisees, so the Pharisees there feel obligated to support him because, well, he's one of our own. We've got to support one of our own. So there's that going on. We can't let the Sadducees tear one of our own to ribbons. But then there's the other element that he's tossing out a key theological difference between the... Is he there concerning the resurrection of the dead? Well, yeah, partly, because Jesus really changed that up quite a bit. But what he's doing is he's bringing to the forefront a chief theological difference that they continually end up fighting with the Sadducees about. So those are two things that are going on. There was a great commotion, and some experts in the law from the party of the Pharisees stood up and protested strongly. We find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or angel has spoken to him? So immediately, they stand up and start protesting, let's let Paul go. This whole thing's without merit. When the argument became so great, the commanding officer feared that they would tear Paul to pieces. He ordered the detachment to go down, take him away from them by force, and bring him into the barracks. So the poor commanding officer at this point is like, oh, this went so terribly. I just wanted to figure out what was going on. I feel like I even know less than I did before, because now they're talking about resurrection of the dead, and I don't know what's going on. Okay, this didn't work out. The following night the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Have courage, for just as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." And that probably excites Paul a lot at this point, because he wants to get to Rome, and he's been following... He's probably wondering at this point, like, how does me being in prison ultimately get me to Rome? And so getting this affirmation from the Lord probably helps. When morning came, the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink anything until they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 of them who formed this conspiracy. They went to the chief priests and the elders and said, "We have bound ourselves with a solemn oath not to partake of anything until we have killed Paul. So we're just going to turn to straight assassination." These are not the priests themselves, but these are a lot of supporters and followers of the priests. "So now you and the council request the commanding officer to bring him down to you, as if you were going to determine his case by conducting a more thorough inquiry. We are ready to kill him before he comes near this place." So they're going to try and rush him and the guard, launch kind of a surprise attack, and just kill Paul. Which the high priest, Ananias, is very used to assassination. This is probably not the first time this had happened. And so they're like, oh, okay, we know what to do. You know, when there's a big inconvenience to the high priest, we know that the high priest will pay us probably pretty well to assassinate his enemy. Let's just get this done. But when the son of Paul's sister heard about the ambush, he came and entered the barracks and told Paul, what? This is the only reference to Paul's family in the New Testament. We don't any, so you're like, son, sister, mother, what? Huh? Yeah, so the son of Paul's sister, and this is the one reference that we get to that in the New Testament. Paul called one of the centurions and said, take this young man to the commanding officer, for he has something to report to him. So the centurion took him and brought him to the commanding officer and said, the prisoner Paul called me and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you. The commanding officer took him by the hand, withdrew privately, and asked, what is it that you want to report to me? So we think that the boy in this case is actually young. A lot of biblical scholars think like 8 to 12 region because of the take him by the hand gesture. So it noted because that is the typical thing that you would do to a younger boy, and so that is what theologians think of in terms of that age. He replied, the Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow as if they were going to inquire more thoroughly about him. So do not let them persuade you to do this, because more than 40 of them are lying in ambush for him. They have bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink anything until they have killed him, and now they are ready, waiting for you to agree to their request. Then the commanding officer sent the young man away, directing him, tell no one that you have reported these things to me. He knows what Ananias is like. He knows what kind of high priest they're dealing with. He knows the accusations that have maybe in the past been murmured about Ananias. And so he doesn't want it to get out because he knows that if this plan fails and they know the commanding officer knows, they'll think of something else. Then he summoned 2 of the centurions and said, okay, so how many of them are there? 40 people going to attack. Make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, 70 horsemen, 200 spearmen by 9 o'clock tonight, and provide mounts for Paul to ride so that he may be brought safely to Felix the governor. This is sort of like encircling, this is the ancient equivalent of encircling Paul with tanks before sending him out. So this is about as heavy guard as you can get for a single man. Interesting that Paul the prisoner is getting such an escort. So it's very, very interesting, but extremely heavy guard. And then taking on even a few Roman soldiers is not for the faint of heart because they're very well trained. They're much better trained than the Jews would have been, but then having this many, it just would have been, you would not have attacked that. And at this point, Lysias, the commander, really wants Paul out because he's like, okay, this is too out of control. Every time I bring Paul anywhere, there's a riot. I need to get Paul out. And at the same time, he's a Roman citizen. I have a duty to protect him. He is not guilty of a crime yet. And no commander wants a citizen assassinated on their watch. It just gets you in deep, deep trouble. I need to protect him. He wrote a letter that went like this. Claudius Lysias to His Excellency Governor Felix. Greetings. This man was seized by the Jews, and they were about to kill him when I came up with the detachment and rescued him because I had learned that he was a Roman citizen. We're not going to include the details of how I found out he was a Roman citizen. I found it out. I found out he was a Roman citizen. We'll just leave it at that. How about? Since I wanted to know what charge they were accusing him of, I brought him down to their council. I found that they're talking about all these like Jewish theology concepts and something about resurrection, and I didn't really understand, but I could tell that it wasn't anything deserving death or imprisonment. When I was informed there'd be a plot against this man, I sent him to you at once, also ordering his accusers to state their charges against him before you. So the soldiers, in accordance with their orders, took Paul and brought him to Antipatris during the night. The next day they let the horsemen go on with him, and they returned to the barracks. Fun fact, this is what Antipatris looks like today. That did not exist in Paul's time, but these ruins were built, I think like a few hundred years after, and are still standing, but they're built kind of on the foundations of the original Antipatris fortress. So if you go to the Holy Land, you could go and see it. But there it is. When the horsemen came to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. When the governor had read the letter, he asked what province he was from, and he learned it was from Cilicia. He said, "I'll give you a hearing when your accusers arrive too." Then he ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace. Great. That's, if you have to be kept a prisoner, being brought there with a full guard and getting to kind of live in a palace for a time, there's worse ways to go, is all I'm saying. There's worse ways to be imprisoned, just to, be kept under guard in a palace. Not bad.
He was also allowed friends to come bringing things.
Exactly.
So he had
Exactly.
some care from outside.
And I think this should tell you that the Holy Spirit is very involved in this. Nothing here is happening that is outside of God's plan. God wants Paul to get to Rome and is going to take very good care of him to see that he gets there. And this whole trial and in trouble thing, this is just the means that the Lord is using to do it. After 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and an attorney named Tertullus, and they brought formal charges against Paul to the governor. So they bought themselves a high-priced, swanky lawyer. So they're not just doing it themselves. They got lawyered up. Felix. Let's talk about Felix. Up to this point, we've gotten some really good Roman leaders. Contrasted with the Jewish leaders, the Roman leaders have been really good. We have gotten some really good Roman leaders. Felix is not one of those leaders. Okay? He's not one of those leaders. He's notorious in history for his cruelty and corruption. Very similar to Pontius Pilate, who we are acquainted with. Pontius Pilate was not corrupt, but he was very cruel and vicious. Felix is very vicious and cruel in the same way. He is on assignment, but he does not particularly like the Jewish people, like many a governor before them, Pontius Pilate looking in your direction. And so he does not mind doing very cruel acts to maintain his authority and power. And that is Felix. When Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, "First, Felix, buddy, we have experienced a lengthy time of peace through your rule, and reforms, the reforms, are being made in this nation through your foresight. Most excellent, Felix. We acknowledge this everywhere and in every way with all gratitude." Oh, Felix, can I just take a second to say how great a governor you are? Just have you lost weight? You have lost weight, haven't you? You're just great. It's just a privilege. I just wanted to just get that out of the way just to start. Did we mention you're just a great guy? Funny, this lengthy time of peace and these reforms that are being made, these are more like purges in reality. Like history, he would have these bloody purges, and these are the things that they're referring to as these great reforms in this lengthy time of peace. Give me just a second. My brightness thing's gonna make my screen get all yellow. There we go. It's gonna be a little bit better. All right. But so that I may not delay you any further, I beg you to hear us briefly, with your customary graciousness. For we have found this man to be a troublemaker, one who stirs up riots. Romans don't like riots. Among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Hey, that's us. There we are. Okay, great. So, solidarity there. Yeah. But again, what Christians were called. Jesus of Nazareth, Nazarenes, the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to desecrate the temple, so we arrested him. So there's 3 charges in that. Charge 1, he's a troublemaker, he stirs up riots. Rome doesn't like riots. Theological differences, they could care less. Saying something about the resurrection of the dead and preaching Jesus as the Christ, whatever. But stirring up riots and disturbances, that's where we bring the hammer down. That's charge 1. Charge 2, sect of the Nazarenes. Romans are polytheistic. They believe in lots of gods. They're pretty accepting of pretty much everyone's religion. Religions, okay. Sects, ooh, that sounds a lot like a splinter group of the sort that typically go off the radar, proclaim messiahs, and then get violent. Religions, okay. Sects, not okay. Tried to desecrate the temple, well, that just causes more of number 1, so that, that ties it back into that. We can't have desecration of the temple. When you examine him yourself, you will be able to learn from him about all these things we are accusing him of doing. The Jews also joined in the verbal attack, claiming that these things were true. When the governor gestured for him to speak, Paul replied, "Because I know that you have been a judge over this nation for many years, I confidently make my defense." This is not buttering him up. He has. He has been a judge. He has ruled over the Jews for 10 years. It's a statement of fact. It's not, because I know you have done this for 10 years, I know that I can speak to you fairly. Great. As you can verify for yourself, not more than 12 days ago, I went up to Jerusalem to worship. That's refutation of the first charge, of troublemaking. You say everywhere I go, I stir up riots and am a troublemaker. I just got here. How can I do that? I just arrived. I'm fresh off the boat, pretty much. Like, how could I be everywhere stirring up riots and being a troublemaker? They did not find me arguing with anyone or stirring up a crowd in the temple courts or in the synagogues or throughout the city. Nor can they prove to you the things they are accusing me of doing. Anyone remember why Paul went to Jerusalem? Like, why did he go? You remember?
Wasn't it to celebrate?
Close. He wanted to be there by the time of, I think, Pentecost. But the main reason he was going was he's got a big bag of money with him that all the other Macedonian churches have collected to give to the poor of Jerusalem. So he's coming to bring a big love offering to help the poor out. He didn't come to debate anyone. He didn't come to preach. He didn't come to preach in the temple courts or in the synagogues. He didn't even come for this purpose. I confess this to you, though, that I worship the God of our ancestors according to the way, which they call a sect, believing everything that is according to the law and that is written in the prophets. So I don't believe anything other than the same thing they believe, but I practice that and I live that out in a different fashion. So he's showing how his beliefs harmonize with the scriptures. And pointing out that this is these are not political charges that Rome should be concerned with. These are religious matters only. Because again, if it's just a difference in religious belief, Rome doesn't care. But they do care when they think you're some kind of troublemaker. I have a hope in God, a hope that these men themselves accept too, that there is going to be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. Fun fact, that right there is the one scripture in the entire New Testament where Paul speaks to the fact that he believes in the resurrection of the unrighteous. Now, there are other parts of scripture where other people, Jesus and in Revelation and in other places, where others in the New Testament have spoken about the resurrection of the unrighteous. But this is the one place in Scripture where we know that Paul believes that that will happen as well. Fun fact. We can go back to the Old Testament. We can see that Daniel talks about those who sleep in the dusty ground will awake, some to everlasting life, and some to non-everlasting life. A bad kind of everlasting life. In Matthew, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne, and all the nations will be assembled before him, and he will separate people one from another like a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And there's going to be sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And that's coming from Jesus. Okay, so elsewhere in the Bible we can see about the resurrection of the unrighteous, but Paul doesn't really speak to it except at that place. Even John, Jesus in the book of John talks about that as well. The ones who have done what is good in the resurrection resulting in life, the ones who have done what is evil to the resurrection resulting in condemnation. Okay. Back to Acts. This is the reason I do my best to always have a clear conscience toward God and toward people. After several years, the reason I came, to bring to my people gifts for the poor and to present offerings, which I was doing when they found me in the temple, ritually purified, without a crowd or disturbance. I did everything in the temple exactly as I was supposed to. I took extra pains to be like extra purified. So that diffuses argument number 3. But there are some Jews from the province of Asia who should be here before you and bring charges if they have anything against me. So you're talking about me. You're saying that wherever I go, riots follow and I cause trouble. Well, that's from people from other countries say those things. Are they here? Where are they? If they're the ones that are saying these things about me, shouldn't they be here? Or these men here should tell what crime they found me guilty of when I stood before the council, other than this one thing I shouted out while I stood before them. I am on trial before you today concerning the resurrection of the dead. This is an awkward position for Felix. He is not Jewish. He is Roman. He is a Roman governor. He has an entire province to administrate. See, we're up in Syria right now. That's Caesarea. We're up kind of in the Syria-ish region. This is part of his province. Israel is part of his province. There are other parts. It's a big province. He's got a lot to do. He's a fairly busy governor. But here he's being put in a position, he's having to decide on a Jewish religious position that even Jewish religious authorities can't agree on. Like, this is not my jurisdiction. Then Felix, who understood the facts concerning the way more accurately, adjourned their hearing, saying, bring up the commanding officer. I want to hear what he has to say. As it happened, Felix actually has a Jewish wife, and he's ruled over Jews for a while, so he may not understand all these Jewish positions, but he does know a little bit more about Christianity than other Romans might. And he's also stalling.
Right, mostly stalling.
I mean, there's a lot of stalling going on here. He does not want to have to decide this. So, I can't come to a decision. Let me summon up Lysias from Jerusalem. Oh, that's a week and a half's travel away. Oh, darn. Well, I guess we'll just have to wait until he gets up here. Well, court is in recess. He ordered the centurion to guard Paul, but to let him have some freedom and not to prevent any of his friends from meeting his needs. Not bad.
Maybe not such a bad thing.
So Paul's got a lot of freedom, and he's got some friends, which probably the friends in this context were Aristarchus, who's traveled with him, and Luke, who he's been traveling with, who's writing this book, and then Philip the evangelist, who we've read elsewhere, lives in this region.
Right in that area.
Okay, so he's in the vicinity. Okay. Some days later, when Felix arrived with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, he sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. Okay. Drusilla is Herod Agrippa the First's daughter. Who is Herod Agrippa the First's daughter? Who is Herod Agrippa the First? He was the Herod who executed James and then gave glory to himself such that the Lord struck him down and he was eaten by worms and died. That Herod Agrippa. This is his daughter. Felix's third wife, they got married when she was 16. She is now 19. This is the way Felix works. He has advanced his career through marriage, and as he has taken on wives that could benefit him politically and then divorce them when he didn't need them anymore and then take on a new wife, quality guy, that Felix. Okay, again, not the best dude. We've got good Roman governors, and then there's Felix. Okay, there's worse than him, but there's also way better. But this is what's going on. He's married to the former king's daughter. So, it won't surprise you that while he's discussing things like righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment, Felix became frightened and said, "Go away for now, and when I have an opportunity I will send for you." See, it's one thing to discuss theology, but when you're discussing things like personal morality with a man who is very cruel and on his third wife and advances his career through marriage and is notoriously corrupt, well, you can see how that might leave him feeling a little awkward, especially about the coming judgment. Yes, you can see that might make Felix feel a little uncomfortable. At the same time, he's also hoping that Paul would give him money.
That's the main thing.
I mean, there's that too. There's that too. And for this reason, he sent for Paul as often as possible and talked with him. So, he, I get really uncomfortable when Paul's talking to me about all that convicting stuff. As long as he kind of keeps it to the non-convicting stuff, I'll talk with him, and then maybe, he'll get tired of talking with me, and he'll just give me a fat bribe. Because, whenever I've had a lot of other prisoners waiting for trial, they gave me a pretty good bribe, and I let them off, so I can't see why this would be any different. After 2 years had passed, Porcius Festus succeeded Felix, and because he wanted to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. So, Felix either, I will have to read up on the whys, but Felix got moved to another assignment, either voluntarily or involuntarily, either trying to climb that next rung or he got moved, which the emperor could do. And then a new governor comes in, and remember, Felix was kind of unique because, he had already ruled over the Jews for 10 years, and he's got a Jewish wife, so he kind of gets it. But a new governor comes in who doesn't have any of that, and he comes in, and new leader comes in, and so there's not a power vacuum. He's trying to make sure that all of the power authorities respect his rule, and so that he can have stability as he kind of transitions into the role. So I definitely want to keep Israel is notorious for having uprisings and riots and stuff like that. And like some years ago, there was this big riot about this guy named Jesus, and it was all messy, and we don't want any of that. This is similar. The Jews would like me way more if I just left Paul in prison, so I'm just going to do that. And so that's where Paul sits for a while. And we'll come back to more next time. Not next week,
Right.
but the week after. Any questions?
Fascinating time of the growth of Christianity is just fascinating.
Mhm.
Things twist and turn.
Yep. The Lord is getting Paul to Rome, and is getting him there in a fairly unusual way. But it's going to ultimately turn into an all-expenses-paid trip for Paul. I mean, I think if you think about it that way, like, he's going to get Paul there, and the church didn't have to raise any money to get him there. Hey, all his expenses paid, sort of.
It does take time.
It does take
And it may have
time.
been a ministry while he was in the prison there. And certainly Luke was nearby, and
Yep.
Luke was there, so
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
probably quite a ministry. 2
Yeah.
years is a long time.
it is a long time. Have a good week.
Yeah.
Oh,
Ananias,
yeah,
they were-
yeah.
The high priest, was that the same Ananias that put Jesus on trial, or is that a different?
You are thinking of